Welcome back to the virtual classroom for Comp 3077 online. This is once again the voice in the videos, Professor Mike Sloan from the Lawrence Kinlan School of Business. We are into week 3, and things in the introduction of these videos will now get a little more swift because I don't have to keep going over like the file saving and where you should be. At this point, all of that stuff has been covered in the first 2 weeks' videos. So I'll just jump right into it a little more quickly each week from now on. This is our week 3 video. It is required. We will have some basic workspace reminders, something that I am meaning to add into the week 2 video as soon as I get a chance as well. And then we'll get into the week 2 case demo, which is definitely stepping it up a bit. We're getting into an intermediate level case here. I still wouldn't call it advanced. A little bit shorter than last week, probably, in the sense of things. And I will move at a normal pace in these videos from this point forward. I'll explain things and I'll give examples and talk about stuff when there's examples to talk about. But keep in mind, every week you can stop me, you can pause me, you can rewind me, you can keep rewatching the same stuff over again if you need to. Always be saving and always be closing before you submit, because remember, Sam will accept a file that isn't closed, which means you can accidentally submit without saving. And then at the very end, I am going to show you one of the questions I threw into the quiz, and I'm going to talk about why I did that. Students are already kind of saying, well, wait a minute, this isn't like the stuff we covered, and it actually is in a way, and I'll explain that at the end. So let's jump right into the content. First thing you should be doing every week, and I'm going to keep reminding you of this, is to go to the weekly module instructions and resources file, see what we're covering. Do not forget to buy your Keycode. If you haven't done that yet, you need to get on that. Before we get started on the case, there are a couple issues not necessarily issues, items that I'd like to identify that you may encounter in the Excel workspace that aren't indicating anything's wrong, but it might appear that something's wrong. So I just want to make sure I point these out to you guys now so you don't waste time, especially on a test or something, thinking you have to fix something when there's really nothing wrong. And I'm going to put this little blurb in front of the week 2 and the week 3 cases. This is the week 2 case file I have open up right now. And the first thing I'm going to discuss are these hashtags right here. So this occurred to me that it was happening just based on the zoom alone. What this means is everything's fine. The content is in there. You can see that when we click on the cell, but the column isn't wide enough to fit it. And without even touching the column width, when I opened up the week 2 case in some of the classroom on the podiums in some of the classrooms, it was zoomed in by default. I don't know why it's defaulting to that. And the zoom was actually creating a situation where the column was just a bit too narrow. So you can adjust the column width, but when I brought this back to standard 100%, I could see it. So that's all that means when you see those hashtags, is that there's a width issue. Now, I could also make the column too small on purpose, and then the hashtags come back. So it doesn't mean there's anything wrong, but it means that you need to adjust that so you can see it. So if you double click on a column, it's the same as going into format and going auto fit. You can also go to default width. You can change the row height and the column widths from here. This is something we didn't cover much in week 1, and I did want to talk about where you can do this, and you can input exact column sizing here. This may or may not be on the test. Not every really simple step that we put on a test was necessarily on a case. So that's where you insert sheet rows and columns and stuff like that too. So under here, you can do row height, column width, but it's a very easy thing to fix. And if Sam doesn't say to mess with column width or row height, you probably wouldn't be affected if you did mess with it, but you probably shouldn't if Sam doesn't say to. You're being graded by a computer. But at the same time, if it did say to do something to the row height, that's how you do it. But that's also why you see those hashtags. It simply means it's not wide enough at the current time to fit it, so you can make it fit it. On a similar note, let's talk about menus and things that could happen to the menu, because changing the width, if you're on a smaller monitor, for example, I'm going to be using merge and center in the week 2 case. And if you're watching the week 3 case now, I used it there. And when I did it, I have pretty good resolution on my screen. I had my Excel window at full width. You could see the words merge and center. As soon as I narrow it down, you can only see the button. It still works exactly the same, okay? Everything's still there. An even better example, actually, if you go to the insert menu, because we have to do header footers on this menu, and you go to the insert on this case, on the week 2 case, you go to the insert menu, header footer is super easy to find. It's right there. It's super obvious. When you make the window or your screen is already narrower, it consolidates all those items into a menu that has a sub menu, and then you have to go in there to find it. It's always going to be in the same place, but sometimes when you switch from one computer to another, because of screen resolution and screen size and the size of the Excel window, it may change the menu on the ribbon slightly. But I just wanted to show you guys this so you know that all that stuff is still there. In fact, in the quizzes, they usually do show you consolidated menus so that you get more used to that. Couple of other things too, when you do header footer in this case, and this is something that's going to come up later in the case that I'll probably just kind of breeze by, but when you switch to the view, so there's all these different views. This is normal view. This shows you if there's any page breaks. That's pretty much it for this one. When you go to insert header footers, it automatically puts you into page layout view. This is actually another way to get into the header footer menu. Okay, and then I can scroll down a bit. If I get back into the main spreadsheet here, I can click into the footer. When you have the header footer thing up, it actually brings up the sub menu. So anytime you have like a chart or a header footer or a picture, this additional little sub menu will come up, which is really cool. So these are all things I just want to make sure you're aware of as you're going into these more advanced cases. The week 3 case is going to get a bit more advanced, although you don't have anything that would require a sub menu. But these additional tabs come up in the ribbon when you're in there. And then when you click back out into the regular spreadsheet, they don't. And I got into this by getting onto this discussion about how you can change the view and all that. So I did want to show you that as well. But my main thing was when you're on the insert menu, if your screen is narrower, you may not see these as readily available. They might be in the sub menu. Final thing about menus and whatnot, you might get onto somebody's Excel at one point. You're like, holy cow, where's the ribbon? And it just looks like this. This is a nice tool, a nice skill to know how to do in a meeting because it kind of cleans up the screen a bit. And especially if we go back here, let's go back to normal view because I got into this page layout view, which you automatically get into when you're doing header footers. Normal view looks like this. If I use that arrow up there and auto hide everything, like it's clean, right? But people often get to this point and they're like, hey, what the heck happened to the ribbon? So you can go there and show the tabs and commands again. You also have the option to just show the tabs. So these are just general workspace things that I want everybody to be aware of. And that way, when you run into them, especially if you're doing an evaluation or something, it won't stump you up and make you think there's something wrong. All right, let's get into SAM and get started with the case. So this account that I created, this dummy account, well, I've probably got very few days left on it now. So we're going to jump in here and get started with the case right away. And when I log in, it's going to tell me that I haven't entered my key code. And I do have 5 days. I did this a little bit later. Some of you may be expired now, which means you have to go back to FOL content. All the links are there. Look under required resources. You need to buy the key code. I'm sorry about this. It's a required resource for this course. You have to do it. You can use it for 2 semesters if by chance you end up not making it through the course. But I still haven't bought mine yet, so I'm going to hit enter later. Don't have much time left. And then I'm in the section. I'm going to do the quiz. Do the quiz after. I have students in my face-to-face sections that are doing the quiz first. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. And if you haven't seen my video on how to run the quiz with the training, make sure you do watch that. But a quick reminder when you're doing that, if you're going to pull the training up while you're in your quiz, please make sure that you open up the second tab like I taught you in that video. You have to open up a second tab, and then you can go right back into SAM, go right to the activity list, and it's the same thing. It's putting you back in there, and open the training with the quiz already open from the first tab. Otherwise, it could save over it. Sorry, I bumped into the mic there for a second. We're not doing that right now, though. This is the case demo, so we're going to grab the case. We're going to hit start. We're going to grab the instructions. Yours will likely go right into downloads. That's where I'm putting mine, just so we're working on a similar playing field here. I'm going to put that in downloads too. And one more time, I'm going to keep talking about this, but I'm going to make it a little more brief. Stop saving multiple versions of the start file. I've again had students work on one start file and then think that the one they had in downloads wasn't the one they had on the desktop, or it was, and they submitted one that they'd renamed correctly but hadn't done any work to and wasted an attempt and got a 0 on it. You download one file, and in Chrome, you can get to it the same way I'm doing here. And with that file, you're going to go in there and rename the file by changing the 1 to a 2. That's it. You may or may not see the extension, but all you do is take that 1 at the end and change it to a 2. And then you can open it up, and then you can open up the instructions. You can even open up the instructions right from where Chrome will tell you you downloaded the file, and you'll already be done with the first step, because the first step of every case is to rename the file. Cannot close. What is that about? That was weird. Enable editing as per usual. Rename the file. We already did that. We're going to get into step 1 and enable editing. Let's jump to the timesheet. So you will, as we move forward into later weeks, you are going to have case files that have more than just one additional spreadsheet past the documentation sheet. You're going to get into bigger files, but still this week, we're just working with this one worksheet. So make sure your name's in there. Don't ever be working with somebody else's account. You don't want to do that. You will get flagged and your file will not be accepted. So that's the routine every week. And then after you're done with this, then you would go and take the 1% quiz, to which the answers are in the training. And again, watch that week 2 video so you know how you do what you're supposed to do to get them both up at the same time. So we've renamed the file. Let's get into the nitty gritty here. So Chanel Larson is a professional assistant with Beryl Bernard Consulting. Chanel is responsible for collecting hours. So this is, I know I have a lot of HR students in this course. This is more of an HR-based style of case, I guess. It's about labor hours in a workforce. She wants to automate some tasks. She wants to set up a spreadsheet basically that has everything ready to go for her coworkers so they can just kind of plug their stuff into it. So we're going to switch to the timesheet. First thing we're going to do is insert a date style function to record the current date. So we are going to here, C5. And in the cell for C5, if you scroll down, you're going to notice it's shaded out. This is because Sam is not going to check to see what the date is. They're going to check to see if you used the proper function. And the now function is a really nice introduction to basic date functions. These are functions where you make the parentheses, you start your parenthesis and you don't even have to put anything in it because it takes the date from the current computer. So the now will take the date here. I'll show you. So literally you start every function starts with an equal sign. You type in now and you see how it auto completes there if you wanted to use it for autocomplete. You start the first parenthesis, you hit enter, and it puts in the date. Okay, other functions will put in the current time. Other functions will put in the time and the date. There's a variety of functions. So I'm gonna stop for a second here and introduce you to another part of the menu that you may or may not end up using after seeing this, because I think it's kind of quicker to always just start with the equal sign, start typing in the function. It will give you the function there. You double click on it, it puts the bracket in, you hit enter, you're done. If you went to the formulas tab, I want to show you at this point in week 3 that if you're looking for certain formulas that you thought you remember stumbling across and you thought you saw them there and that you could do something with them, an easy way to find them is to go through the way they are here, categorized. So there is a whole section for day and time style functions. And you can see that these are all, there's a bunch of different ones available. We're going to use a couple different ones in this particular case, but if you click on them or hover over them, it will tell you exactly what they do. So it would be difficult to find an Excel course where we taught you how to use every single function, but just like the transition between the case and the quiz, once you've used some of the date style functions, if on the quiz, for example, I asked you to use the today function instead of the now function, which I will, by the way, you do it the same as the now function. So, but the reason I'm showing you this in the formulas tab, because we usually do everything from the home tab. You have the basic drop down here with your basic functions. Everything beyond that, if you wanted to pull it up without typing it or starting to type it, you would go to the formulas tab. And with the formulas tab, you can pull the stuff up from there. And I'm going to bring this up in a couple more minutes when we do our first if function, and I'll show you why. But I just wanted to show you that that's another way to bring these up, where I'm usually just typing them in the case. So that's step number 1. We've added the now function to C5. And what it does is it brings in the date from your system on your computer. So even if your date's wrong, like if it's the wrong date and it's not today's date, Sam will still mark it right as long as you use the proper function. And that is the reason, by the way, that this is shaded out, because obviously the publishers of the case had no idea what day you were going to do it on. So moving on to the next one, this is kind of cool. So these functions are, I think they were updated into 2016 after 2016 came out, but they're much more commonly used in 2019 and 365, especially since COVID, where people are in and out of work all the time and there's holidays and then they're working on holidays. So what this does is it calculates work days for you, knowing that weekends are off, and you even have a field where you can put in holidays. It's pretty cool. So we are going to C3 is our start date. We're doing 20 days in C4. So we're going to, each worksheet covers a period of 20 work days. In cell C4, create a formula using the workday function. So you don't even have to keep reading at that point. You can go, I left the worksheet with my now function active. So equals, you can start typing it in, or I'm going to backspace there and escape right out of the cell. Like I showed you here, if you wanted to, you could pull it up right from here. Okay, so our start date, we are going to use, wait, what? Nope, that's not, how did my Alt-Tab get messy here? I love Alt-Tab, it's such a good keyboard shortcut, but sometimes you pick up the wrong tabs and then, so start date, C3 is the start date. Okay, let's get, so we're there, okay. Start date, so you can reference the cell C3 or type it in, C3. Okay, and we are going to go 19 days from the start date. And then it will know which days are weekends, and then it will give you an appropriate date. We're not assuming there's any holidays. It didn't bring that up. Notice that when I brought this up, I was all of a sudden working in this dialog box. Notice also that I didn't even say anything about it. I just did it to see if you guys would notice how I did that. So I want to start over again. I want to show you this quickly because this is the case where you're going to start wanting to use what we refer to as the wonderful and blessed function wizard. So instead of going like this, instead of just going equals workday, start your parenthesis, and you notice that you probably notice that it gives you the fields you need to fill in separated by a comma, and you could just start typing those in the formula bar. What I teach students is as soon as you have anything that's even remotely more involved than like a sum, a min, or a max, anytime there's more than a couple fields, even more than one, use the traditional dialog box that we used to bring up every time we do a function, which is the function wizard. So, you know how I said I was going to bring the formula bar, the formulas menu up again? If you pull up a function from the formula menu and click on it from there, it will automatically bring the function wizard up. So that is kind of handy. And I do like that. And you don't have to necessarily know where the function is in the particular menu. You can actually just go into insert function and show all, and it will show you every single function. And then you can type the function here, workday, and then hit go, and it will find it. And that will also bring the function wizard up. I still have this opinion that the quickest way is to start typing the function, it'll auto-complete it for you, and then you hit the FX, and that will bring the function wizard up. So as usual, there's a bunch of different ways to get into this space to work within the function wizard, but what I love about the function wizard is, unlike just doing it right in the formula bar where it does at least hint to you what you should be putting in each of those fields, here, when you sit in each of the fields and in the input boxes, it tells you what's supposed to be in there. As you click from one to the next, it'll tell you exactly what's supposed to be in there. So start date, they gave it to us in the question. We're going to start on the date that is in C3. So you don't type the date in, you always reference the cell. And we're going to go 19 days. And notice that as I'm sitting in there, I have this nice explanation for what's happening there. And actually, those are the number of non-weekend and non-holidays. So it knows how to calculate that. So I don't want you guys to be confused by that. It calculates the work days based on the fact that they're work days. So you would take out weekends as holidays. It's a neat tool. I mean, I think it's started to get used a lot more after COVID. So, and that's it. That's the function. So moving on, save your file, Control S. Use autofill. This is cool. So this is and I'm going to take a little bit of extra time to show you this, and then I'm going to start picking it up as I show you the functions, because I don't want this video to be so long that it's just grueling for you guys. I do, because you can pause and go back. I'm trying to make more compact videos this time around with the course, because I'm doing all new videos here. So what they're talking about is a section here and a section here. So typically, if you autofilled like the number 1, it would just copy the number 1 a bunch of times. But Excel is pretty smart. So if you actually highlight the 1 and the 2, Excel is smart enough to recognize that there's a series there. It even gives you this like autocomplete thing where you can do all sorts of stuff in there. That's the quick analysis tool. I don't use it very much. I always like and you can do it from here too. You can go back to the Home tab and you can fill series from the fill menu, and that's there. So what you're going to do here is you're going to highlight both instead of just the 1. And when you highlight both, watch what happens. It knows there's a series and it gives you the incremental series. In fact, this even works for months. So if I type in January down here, don't do this. This isn't part of the case, but it would know February, March. See how cool that is? Even if I type in Jan, even if I don't put a capital J, it will still know when I autofill. So sometimes to recognize the series, you don't have to highlight more than 1 cell. But to get that to work, all I had to do differently than what you're used to doing with autofill is I had to highlight the extra one below it. As soon as it picks up on the series, it will do that. So if that works with months, do you think Excel would be smart enough, and this is the second half of step 3, to know that that means Monday, not just MON? And when I scroll over, look what happens. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but abbreviated. So it even autofills on abbreviations. In fact, there'll be a question on the quiz. This is kind of cool. If you were to say like phase 1, and then you tried to autofill that, look at how smart it is. Isn't that cool? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So if you were doing this on a much larger scale, you can see how much time that would save. So you learned autofill in week 1. Now you just learned how to autofill series and how easy it can be. And again, you can do it from these different menus. I prefer to do it, just highlight more than 1. But when it's a recognizable series like months or days, you don't even need to highlight more than 1. You just highlight the 1 and it fills it in. It's pretty cool. Now we're going to jump right into a function that I feel like, especially students who took Excel in high school, like teachers and professors, instructors, they make such a big deal out of the if function when at the end of the day, it's really not that complicated if you just understand the basics of what it's actually doing. So most Excel functions, like sum, are saving you time by taking a series of cells, like A9 to A10 or something much longer than that, much larger range, and adding it all up without you having to individually add up all the numbers. There's some functions, there's min, there's max, there's all these financial functions that we'll get into, I think after the first, soon enough, that calculate interest for you based on the number of periods in the loan and stuff like that. If is a little different. So if is actually querying. It's asking Excel a question. It's saying, hey, I want to know what's going on with this cell over here. Is it greater than 0? Is it less than 0? Does it equal this? Is it less than or equal to this? So generally, you're using some of the equality signs, the less than equals, and you're asking Excel a question. And then there's going to be an answer to that question. Now, we will later in the course get into more complicated versions of this where you're asking multiple questions and stuff like that. This is simply just saying, hey, I want to know if this is equal to 0. Now, the reason I picked this case, the reason I like it so much is because right from the get-go, they're showing you when you start to get into more complicated functions that you can put functions inside of functions. And that simple functions like sum, average, min, max, they can be treated just like a number in the context of another function. Okay, so we're going to do this, just do exactly as I do, but I'm going to be explaining it along the way. So we are done with step 3. We're on to step 4. We're going to go down here into B17, and we're going to bring up an if function. We're going to bring in an if function. Sorry, I can barely say that. So you start with equals, you type if, you start the parenthesis, you can go right to the fx and bring it up. You can also do it the other way. You can sitting in there without even typing equals. I guess that is one way where the function formulas, where the functions coming out of the formulas tab right from the menus do save a bit of time. So you could go in here and pull up the if, and it automatically brings in the function wizard, puts in the equal sign, puts in both parentheses, aka Canadian brackets, whatever. So I'm just giving you the song and dance about all the different ways you can pull up the function. And then you could do the full search for it here. If you don't know which category it's in, you can choose all, you can still categorize. There's always ways to bring up the function wizard. And if you put a function in, I'll use this as an example because there's already a function in that cell and you want to get back to the function wizard, just sit on the cell, click the FX, it pulls it up again. So lots of basics on the function wizard here today. We are going to pull up an if function, bring in an if function. So let's use the function wizard this time. The question I am asking is, do these cells right here add up? Are they equal to 0 if you sum them up? So they actually want you to use a sum function. Now, generally speaking, a more sensible way to do this would have been to have a total column, which don't do this. I'm just giving you an example. I'll always try and tell you when I'm giving you an example and not doing a step in the case. And let's go back to the home tab, grab an auto sum, done. This is the total sum of all the hours worked in week 1. So what you could do with this if function then is you could start the if function, okay, bring up the function wizard and say, okay, cool. Does this number equal 0? That's usually how simple an if test is. When I grade your quizzes, for example, I go to the cell where the quiz mark is to transfer to FOL because they're pass-fail. Okay, a pass-fail means that it's going to be pass over one certain number and fail below it. And the pass threshold is a 70. So I say, does A2, is it greater than or equal to a 70? And if it is, I have another column where I change the mark to 100. And if it's not, I make it a 0 because it's pass-fail. And then everybody who had a 70 or higher, it goes, that's the simplest way to look at it. So what an if statement is all about is it's checking something out somewhere else in the spreadsheet. It's saying, hey, what's going on in this cell? Because based on one scenario or the other, true or false, yes or no, and a question that has 2 answers, we're going to do 2 different things based on the answer to that question. So all we're doing here is asking the question, do these cells equal 0 when you add them all up together? And one way to have done it would have been to total it up, but that's not what they said to do. So if you were doing that with me, you can go and delete that stuff. Go back in here, pull up an if statement again. Notice how I pulled up the if statement with the function wizard 4 different times before I'm actually going to do it with you. I'm doing that on purpose, right? So the question you're going to ask is, using a sum function, start your bracket, your parenthesis, do these add up to or equal 0? Do they equal 0? Notice that I did not put an equal sign in front of the sum function. You will end up having equality signs mixed in with nested functions, especially an if function, because you need to ask if something is less than, greater than, less than or equal to, whatever it may be. But that's not, you will never, once you put the equal sign in once to identify you're about to do a function or just basic math, as we learned in week 1, you never have to put it in again to identify a function. It may show up again for another reason, but you do not need the equal sign in front of here. As soon as I do that, notice how it doesn't populate over on the right side here. You always know you've done something right if you get an answer on the right side. And as per my love for the function wizard that I showed you a few minutes ago, when you're sitting in this field, it will tell you what that is. And when you go here, it will tell you this is if the answer to that question you asked is no, or is yes, sorry, or true, and this is if it isn't. So the SAM step gives you the scenarios on what to put in there too. They say, hey, if the cell, if it is equal to 0, the cell should display nothing. Now, when you have an if statement, and there are other functions that operate in a way that can return text as well, it does allow you to return text as an answer, so non-numerical data. And that is also how you would return a blank answer. So any text that goes into the answer for an if statement has to be in quotes. If you want a blank answer, you can literally just put 2 quotes. Do not put a space. Do not add extra quotes. It's just 2 quotes. That's it. Right up against each other. And then if the answer, if this is actually true, and there were no hours worked that week, which is not a scenario that even occurs here, but they're just asking you to do this, to set it up that way. That's just, so don't question it, just do it. Otherwise, display the number of hours worked. Sorry, it's the opposite of what I just said. What is wrong with me? There is not a scenario where it's equal to 0. So that's not actually going to come up, which is kind of what I was saying. I just thought it came out the other way. All of these are going to be false, is what I was saying, because there wasn't any week where there were 0 hours worked. So all of them are going to revert to the false value, which is simply adding up the hours. And again, they want you to do that using a sum function. So what we're doing here is called nesting. Nesting. Okay, so if we go back to the slide, we're talking about stepping it up with nested functions. We're doing nesting. We're doing functions inside of functions. Okay, now we're going to do, the lookup doesn't have any nesting, and then we're going to do absolute referencing with the lookup, but this is a big deal to be able to do this, and we're already like halfway through the case. So you know how to do a sum function. I've just taught you the ins and outs of an if function. You're just putting a sum function inside of an if function. Just remember, you never need an equal sign in front of it. You click, this is what you need. You can pause the video here. That's what you should have. Click OK. It should return the total. And you can drag that right through, and then it will drag down with the function through to the next row. So this group, so B to F in row 10, B to F in row 11, B to F in row 12. But you should have it all set up exactly that way. And you can, I will continue to give you the instruction sheet that has the answers here. So you can go and refer to that, and you can see that you do have the right numbers. Right on. So I went through that probably more quickly than I do in my live lecture because I'm answering questions and I'm explaining things. You guys can go back and watch that part again if you need to have a better comprehension of it. By the way, this is something that's going to keep coming up throughout the course. This little thing here, that logo, that is what the quick analysis tool is. This is a fairly new thing in Excel too. I think only the last couple versions where it started. So you can fill without formatting, you can fill with formatting. It gives you all these options every time you fill something. It's very common. In fact, sometimes you can highlight stuff. That's a quiz question. I'm always hinting at quiz questions. There's a quiz question that asks you to use the quick analysis tool to sum something up. You can highlight the range first, and then it will give you the option in the quick analysis tool to do a sum right underneath it. As always, if you struggle with any quiz questions, just refer to the training. It'll show you exactly what to do. Moving on. So that was kind of cool. Let's do another Workday function. I didn't get enough of that one. So in cell H2, create a formula using the Workday function to calculate the date 5 days after the period end date in cell C4. Okay, so we're back on the sheet here. And in this cell, they want you to use Workday again. So we can bring it up through here if we want. Get right into the function wizard. And they want to use C4 as the starting point. So C4 here is at near the end of February. Now, 5 days after that, and I think maybe one of the reasons they started using these functions more is because not a lot of people who use Excel realize you can use dates as numbers. Like you can take a date and just add 10 to it in another cell, and then it will automatically format like a date 10 days later, which is kind of cool. So that's what the Workday function does for you as well. So C4 is your start date. 5 days later, put 5. Click OK. And you've got, what is that, March 5th? So you can go and confirm it down here. Now, keep in mind, and I'm glad I remember to bring this up. This is not a situation where it's going to grade the dates based on your language settings. That was only in week 2. Well, it may come up again in a later case, but up to this point, that was only in week 2 where it said, make sure you use this format. It should be set up just like this. And remember that I said the slashes versus dashes, that doesn't matter. But in week 2, last week, you did have to have the month and the day in the proper order. This time around, they're showing you it's the American way is what I was talking about from last week. But if you are using, actually Yeah, it's just a totally different format. But it's just checking for the right date. It actually isn't checking the format on this one. So it's a good thing to know about SAM is if it doesn't specifically say anything about the format, it's usually not going to mark you down because of the format, nor will it there, I promise you, okay? So you could see the month and the day are in opposite order, but it is, and the year's first on this one, but it is the correct date. All right, so moving on to the next step. We are going to do a lookup function now. So this is another one I'm going to explain before we do it, but this one actually will take on an even simpler explanation. The best way I can describe a lookup function is that it operates like a phone book. And I stole that from one of the other Excel professors that had given me that analogy once. And I said, oh, that's great. That makes perfect sense. Because in a phone book, you have all the letters of the alphabet divided up. It's in sections. So if I wanted to look for a name that started with the letter C, I would go to the section of the phone book that showed the C's. And then I would go and find that name. So a lookup function in Excel specifies a specific section of the spreadsheet where you're going to look for something specific in that section. That's what it's doing. So this is another one where if you pull the function wizard up every time you do it and look at the explanation of what you're doing as you click into each of those fields, it will make the function a lot easier to understand. So again, once I get to it now, I'm going to kind of go through it fairly quickly, but if you need to watch it again, you just pause me, rewind, and go back and watch it again. So we are going to be in this cell. I believe it was that cell. We're going to do a lookup function in I6. We're going to be looking for the thing that is in I5. And usually, in addition to the thing you're going to be looking up, I'm doing quotes right now because you are literally looking something up, is either kind of right next to something or right above it or right near it. Also near where you're doing a lookup function, there will probably be a label that will be labeled in terms of the result you're trying to find. So this will all make sense once I pull it up. So I can do this. You take a guess in terms of which menu in the formulas collection of which menu category, I should call it, which category in the formulas tab this would be under. Probably the one that says lookup. There's straight up lookup, there's horizontal lookup, there's vertical lookup. So we're going to do VLOOKUP. And the first thing we're doing is identifying what we're going to be trying to find, which we put in there, in the range that we're going to identify right here. So this is I5. You can type it in or click on it. This was A17 to G20. So it's this range here. So it's including the headers at the beginning, which are going up and down, by the way. Hence, it's a vertical lookup. And then this part is always difficult for students to understand because every example that we use in a SAM case is all the way to the left of a spreadsheet. So the column index number. So I want to make it very clear. The column index number is the column in the range that you've chosen where the thing you're looking up is. So if you go over here, you can see we're looking for hours worked. And if we go into this range where it has the labels first and then a bunch of categories, hours worked, holiday, vacation, sick, comp, total. Hours worked are in the second column of this total range. So A17 to G20, the hours worked are in B. So the answer for the column where the worked data is 2 because it's the second column. And if you look down here in the function wizard, right down here, it tells you this is the column. And so if this table array, if this selection, this specific section, let's pretend it's the letter C in the phone book, if this happened to be all the way over, in column O, it started, but the range was still just these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns, and the answer you were looking for was for hours worked, the column index number would still be 2. You wouldn't count all the way over from the left side of the worksheet all the way over to the right. It's 2. Okay, so that's what it is. And you click OK, and it pulls up 28. 28 is the number from right here. So I'm going to pull the function back up to show you what it's doing and to fix it because we are going to need to do something based on the next step. So now, what's happening here is there's some kind of data. Sometimes it's a word, sometimes it's a number, sometimes it's a general range, and that's where this might come up. the range lookup. You don't have to use this unless you're looking up something that would fall into a general range. So this is not a range lookup, so you can just leave it blank, or you can omit it. It's the closest equals true or omitted, find an exact match false. I mean, you should put false if you're looking for an exact match, but because it's the number range, like, it's not a range lookup. If you leave it blank, it's still going to work because the numbers are so precise. Like, it's an exact match, right? So you very rarely need to do that unless it has to fall into a general range. You don't need to address that field. So these fields will always need to be there. And this particular item is the thing you're trying to find in this range. Usually it's in the first column. And the range that you're trying to find it in is the next thing, the table array. And then the column where the answer that you're looking for, which is usually identified right near the cell where you're doing the lookup, is going to be how many columns over from the beginning of the range, which in this case is 2. So I click OK, and that looks great. And then the next step says, oh yeah, cool. Okay, now that you just learned a lookup function, drag it down. And then just fix the column, because now we want to do the same exact thing and look it up in the holiday column, vacation column, sick column, comp column, and the total column. And when I do that, it doesn't even come close to matching what I did, what you would see, not what I did, what you would see here. And there's a reason for that. And this is our first example of a requirement for absolute referencing. Okay, so absolute referencing, it's a big deal. It's listed here. It's a super, super simple way to make cell references lock and not change. And it also, as you're doing it, makes you become, at a very basic level, coders as you're working on this. So I'm going to undo that. So what's happening here, like, this is what we wanted to happen here with the if function, right? We wanted it to go B10, B11, B12, and go down each time and scroll through those rows. This time around, I'm making a reference to a cell that I don't want to change. Okay, I want to summarize week 1 here, and I want to do a summary of it here. And I want it to stay on week 1 the whole time. But when I scroll this through, it goes from I5 to I6 to I7. Then it's actually circulating back through itself. You know how it works. That's one of the things we like about Excel, is that it does that for you automatically. But this time around, I need that to stay the same the whole time. And the way you do this is by putting $ in front of the column letter and the row number. Or if you just need one thing to be, like, technically, it would work if you just made the column absolute, because you're not dragging right or left. But most SAM cases, whenever you need to make something absolute, the expectation is that you make both items, the column and the row, absolute. A shortcut for that may or may not work on some of your laptops, which is one of the reasons I try not to teach it. I know a lot of high school teachers said absolute referencing. That's F4 on your keyboard, and they don't even explain what it is. They just say when you need to lock up a cell reference, hit F4. You are technically coding here. A currency symbol inside of a function has nothing to do with currency or accounting format. It is telling Excel that whatever follows that currency symbol, it cannot change no matter where you scroll. And we did encounter this last week when we did the row titles, because when you set row titles for printing, these will be absolute. So it made the rows absolute. So make that fully absolute and do the same thing here. Now I have a laptop where if I hit my keyboard, it doesn't do it. Like function. Ignore the fact that I did get it to work. Okay. Yeah, I had to use the function key with the F4. Like the keyboards in the labs, you just hit F4 and it puts them all in for you. But just be careful with the keyboard shortcut for this, because Sam will want you to have the $ in front of everything. And you noticed I highlighted it when I did that, right? So if I just had A17 to G20 and I was sitting at the end of it without it highlighted, and I hit function F4, it only makes the closest cell reference absolute. So sometimes it's easier just to type them in, especially if you have a laptop where the function keys operate in a bit of a different way. Now, when I click OK, I will have the same exact answer I had before, but what I've done by putting these $ in front of the cell references is I've locked them up so they can't change, because what I'm trying to do will be based on the same range here every time, this range. And what I'm trying to do to summarize week 1 will be based on the same reference to week 1 every time. So I don't want that to change. So now I scroll down, and what I'm going to get is the same exact answer every time. And this step now is such a cool step. This is one of the reasons I picked this case too. I really picked and chose cases this time around. So what it wants you to do is copy. It never says anything in here about using absolute referencing, because the expectation is you've read this chapter or this collection of chapters in the book, and that you know that it should be absolute, and you just make it absolute, right? So they don't say it to you because kind of by default, anytime you're doing lookup functions, most of the stuff you're referencing there is generally going to be absolute if you're dragging it anywhere, unless it's just sitting in the same cell and it doesn't matter. So I needed to make those absolute. And now as I drag that through, it works, but it's the same column every time. So this one was for column 2, holidays in column 3, vacations in column. So what you can do, and if you're on a Mac, it's kind of cool because it brings up the function wizard automatically every time you click on it. On a PC, you can just click in the formula bar and do it in here, or you can do it, click in the FX and do it in the function wizard, or you can do it right in the formula bar. So what you need to do is leave the first one the same as it was. This one, you go change the column index number to 3 because it's the holiday column. This one to 4, and so on. 5, 6, and finally the total column 7. And then you'll be happy to see that your numbers match up to the figure at the end of the case. So I just showed you a lot there. I just showed you absolute referencing and lookup at the same time. And by the way, now that we're talking about absolute referencing, and you're going to know what that is when we bring it up, and it's the dollar signs locking up the cell reference. Anytime somebody makes a reference to relative referencing, that's just normal without having the absolute on there. And if you encounter a quiz where it says like just make one of the parts of the cell reference absolute, you just put the dollar sign just in front of that part, because you will have a quiz question like that. Now, we are going to get into some it's like really basic math, but the wording of all these questions is done deliberately in a way that tries to get you not to put things in the right order. Everybody, of course, did a sum function for this and then did minus J8, which isn't right. It says to take that from J8. So, you're going to do exactly that. And this, again, demonstrates that when you have simple functions like sum, average, min, max that are just taking a collection of numbers and returning a single value to you, these functions can be treated as numbers when you're doing basic math. So I want to take J8 here. Okay, so equals. So I'm in K8. I'm going to go equals. And if you do the sum function first, that's fine. You can just put the J8 in after. But what they're telling you to do by taking the sum function from J8 is to take J8 minus, and then you start the sum function. Now, here is where you could start using algebra as well, but because everything's this, in terms of the order of operations, there's no multiplication or division or anything like that. You don't need the extra parentheses or brackets yet for algebra. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to remind you that algebra is a nice thing to have under your belt when you're using Excel, just so you never have miscalculations based on the order of operations, meaning that multiplication and division are always before addition and subtraction, that kind of stuff. So here it's just basic math, subtraction and addition. So D17 to D20, I can highlight that, D17 to D20, which has nothing in it, by the way. And then you can just hit enter. And then, oh, yeah, wait. No, I'm glad I did that. You know how I always tell you don't have to complete the parenthesis? If there's other math in there and the sum isn't right up against the equal sign, you do have to complete the parenthesis. And I forgot to show that to my face-to-face class, but you guys just got to see that because I actually am so used to not having to complete the parenthesis. I didn't. Same thing here, but with a different range. So just J9 equals J9 minus sum of E17 to E20. So sum E17. Now I'm typing it in, but you could highlight it too. And then close it, and then hit enter. Now this one is just silly. So this one here has you doing stuff just like the last two steps you did, but combined together. And it doesn't make it any more complicated. You just have to slowly read it and do what it says. So I'm going to do that with you guys here. So go to K10. You're going to subtract from J10, F17 to F20. So you kind of get the pattern now. So J10, if you look at what's in these, right? That's the beginning of the period. And then you're subtracting the total sum minus sum of F17 to F20. And this one I can highlight. So F17 down to F20, close your parenthesis. So it's just taking off the hours that were worked. And then you get 450. But we weren't done yet. Okay, so you did the beginning part, and you can always go back in and deal with it more later. So then after that, they wanted you to add the total of G17 to G20. So go back in, like go into the formula bar, or you can do it right in here too. Plus, don't put a comma, okay? You're not listing things. You need to actually add it. Even though if you put the comma, I think it actually still works out to be the same number because it knows to add it, but Sam will mark it wrong. So you're adding. So plus the sum of G, so sum again. So why are we doing this? Because I want you guys to know, this is why I like this case so much, that you can treat functions as numbers, a lot of functions, depending on the way they work. And that often makes things a lot easier for you than having to go and do the totals. If the totals were done, you would just be referencing the single cells. But this is another way to do it. And then ultimately, after you add that on, you subtract 160. And you should end up with that. So when I was talking about the algebra thing, I'll go use the sum function as an example. I just want to make sure you guys knew what I was talking about. Like, if you wanted to make sure that this was equal to 0, but you wanted to make sure everything was kind of separated, you could add a parenthesis around that. And it would still work exactly the same way, and Sam would still mark it right. Sam won't have an issue with that. It's the same thing here when you have all these different situations. So if you want to make sure that this is calculated in the right order, you could put parentheses around each of the two sum functions. And this is a best practice with algebra, but it's still going to work out the same, and Sam's not going to care either way. You don't really need the algebraic separations until you start doing the different orders of operations. Okay, then these last few are really simple, and then you're done. So I'm going to save again. I haven't saved in a while. So let's go copy the formula, J11 to K11. J11. Where the heck is it? J11, it's here. So that makes perfect sense. Over to K11, it's just a sum function, and instead of doing an auto sum, they wanted you to copy it. You still would have got it right if you did an auto sum. J16, do an average of B9 to F12. So equals average. You can use the auto average if you want. B9 to F12. Let's make sure I got that range right. Yeah, max B9 to F. It's the same range every time. Average, max, and min. Doesn't mean you could drag that down. I guess you could make it absolute and then change the function name. But it's just as easy to go max. Let's highlight it this time just to mix it up a bit. B9 to F, all the way over to F12. And then equals min. B9 all the way over to F12. So that does wrap it up. And I am going to add a little chunk of the video, which my voice might sound a little different because I'm going to do it after this. I'm doing this in sections, showing you the goal seek thing. But first, we're going to grade this. So always be saving. I have been saving. Let's close it without even remembering to save. And look, it prompts you to save, right? So save your changes. Go back to Sam. Submit the case. If you don't get 100, go back and fix it. Now I always set up my my submissions, even if I've screwed up, and you'll never know if I screwed up or not because I go back and fix it in the video. My submissions will always be set at 100 unless I deliberately mess something up so that it doesn't grade it at 100 so I can show you how I'm fixing it. But this will be 100, so every step you've seen in the video has shown you exactly how to complete this case and earn 100%. As usual, you're being given the answers, and I will make proof of that right now. Here you go. So we're going to go to my next snip about the goal seek question on the quiz, and then we're going to wrap up. I have this question I put on the quiz, and I want to explain why. I did give you guys a bit of justification on why I often choose some. There'll always be one or two sort of brain busters on the quiz that maybe we didn't cover at all. And the training, of course, will give you the answers. But this one I put on for a specific reason because we started working with if statements in this particular case. And goal seek is another really simple version of what if analysis. You're asking a question, and the question then leads to some sort of result. So what if analysis, while it isn't a function, I did want to get out in the course a little sooner than weeks 5 or 6. I don't think we get into it till like week 7, actually, because the test is in week 6. So this question is not something you would have covered on the case, but you have a basic understanding of logical tests and if analysis. This is actually a tool. It's not a function. So in order to get this question right, you could watch the training, or I'm going to demo it right now. So what they're trying to figure out is, hey, I'd like this average that's 146. I'd like to see that up at 160. And the kitchen show is the second most popular one. I feel like the attendance is a bit low for the kitchen workshop. So what would I have to get the kitchen workshop number up to get the average to be 160? It's statistical math. They're kind of working in reverse. So it's pretty cool. Cool thing about goal seek, it'll do that for you. And it doesn't matter where you're sitting on the surface of the worksheet because it's not a function. You can plug in the inputs once you pull up goal seek. So you have to go to the data tab, and under the data tab, you have to go to, I had to click in the, see, it does make you click somewhere, but it's irrelevant where you click. So I had to click into the worksheet, and there is a tab for what if analysis. If I were to downsize this, it consolidates the menu just like it would as if you were in real Excel. So that would be in the forecast menu, what if analysis, goal seek. And basically you're just plugging and chugging the data in there to do the stats for you. So we'd like to see D13, which is where the average is, at 160. And we'd like to change our kitchen participants. So it's going to tell you how many people you need at the kitchen workshop to get up to that. So we're going to change D4. So those are your inputs right there. You click OK. You click OK again, and you're going to need 351 people to get that average up there. So that's just one of the quiz questions I wanted to show you. Again, there's a few tricky ones, and that's what the training is for. So that is it for week 3. We covered those basics at the beginning. It's the same blurb I had in front of week 2 as well. And you should start noticing at this point that you can use the chapters to skip around. So you didn't have to watch that again if you didn't want to. You could have always just fast forward too if there weren't chapters. But I am trying to do those chapters on every case now, every video for the case. We've covered the case. We got the case done. We got 100%. And we covered that. I will see you next week.